Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've got a few minutes to chat with you this morning. I'm John Bela with Gehl Studio, and I wanted to talk today a little bit about the relationship between public space. I think we all believe in the value of public space, and the relationship between public space and public life. Because ultimately, what makes a great downtown, what makes a vibrant public space are the people that are in it, right? It's not the quality of the benches, it's not the lighting, it's really the people that activate and enjoy public space. And if we care about people in space, my mentor Jan, Donald Appleyard, Holly White, all talk about the importance of measuring what you care about. If you care about people in public space, you have to measure them and evaluate what it means to activate public space. At Gehl, we use observation and analysis to help us understand public life. What does it mean for public life in cities? And why do we study public life? Well, we do it to find human stories. What are the stories that we want to tell about our cities? Or to inform strategy and design. We use public life data to really inform design decision-making in cities. To provide evidence about how are we doing? How's a program working in a space we've designed? To make objective choices, and to benchmark progress. We often do a benchmarking in cities to evaluate how improvements are shaping cities over time. And this is all about discovering opportunities for making great public space in cities. So specifically, what are some of the tools we use to understand public life? Well, we measure people moving, whether it's walking, cycling, and then we observe the age and gender of the folks who are walking and cycling in places. We do tracing. So this is discovering desire lines, how people actually move through a space relative to how we think, how we've designed a space to support public life. How are people actually using a space? We do test walks, where how long does it take to get from A to B? The pedestrian signal timing, interruptions in the roadway. How do all these things shape our experience of moving through a city? Well, then how do we use this? How do we use this data? In the case of the movement data, I have an example from New York City. So this is Times Square, 2007, the Times Square Alliance, the Bloomberg administration. Jeanette Sadiq-Khan asked Gehl to come and observe public life in Times Square. And we discovered that 90% of the space in Times Square was dedicated to moving and storing vehicles, and 11% of the space in Times Square was sidewalks, so space which is dedicated for people. But the movement, the public life patterns were actually reversed. 90% of the people in Times Square were on foot, crowding onto the sidewalk, spilling into the street, and only 11% of the people in Times Square were in vehicles. Using this data, the Times Square Alliance, Jeanette Sadiq-Khan, the Bloomberg administration decided to flip the script in Times Square to narrow vehicular lanes, create a whole bunch of more space for people. It's one of the ways that we can use public life data to inform design decision-making in cities. So this is the Times Square of tomorrow. And you may or may not agree with some of the activities that are happening in Times Square now, and it's part of the public life of the city, but it's hard to argue with a 63% decrease in pedestrian injuries, 80% fewer people spilling into the roadway, and overall, most people say that Times Square has just improved for everyone. We also measure people staying. We call it stationary activity or stickiness in places. And this is, we look at people standing, waiting for transit. We've got 11 categories that we use. Sometimes we develop specific categories for different places that we're working. And how do we use this data? So what does it mean to observe staying activity? Some places are really great for people passing through. There's a lot of invitations for people passing through. But where are the invitations for people to stop and linger and hang out and spend time? Well, this is Brighton New Road before a public space improvement that Gehl was part of. And this is Brighton New Road after. And what we observed is that now it's become one of the most popular places in the city to spend time, a 600% increase in lingering activity and invitations to socialize and to gather. And it's important to get that kind of benchmark. We compare our public life data with public space data, quality criteria, so things like facade analysis. And let me go back and see if I can. And so this is looking at the quality of facades throughout. This is in Somerville, Massachusetts, actually. So is there porosity? Is there active ground floors? How do these things contribute to the experience of moving through the city? And so we use this public life data, these observations of public life, to investigate how people use their environment, and we compare that with, as designers, we use that to inform how we think about form in cities. So this relationship between life and form, between public space and public life. This is an example of some more recent methods we're using in terms of collecting data. This is my colleague Eric in Copenhagen, using GPS to trace patterns of movement through a city. In this case, we're interested in not just where people are moving, but the rate at which people are moving in a city. Again, we're looking for this slowness, actually, for lingering activity. So the city of Copenhagen's been doing bike improvements for many decades and actually counting people on bikes and making improvements to various spaces. One of the things that's happened more recently is that in some of these spaces that have been, more space has been allocated for the cyclists, all of a sudden, using this GPS tracing map, we observed that people were lingering in places, unexpected places. One of these bridges in Copenhagen became a great place for people watching. Well, using that data, going out and following up with observations of public life, we came up with a justification for investing in public realm to support the kind of life that was emerging in these places. Just a very simple example of public life data informing design decision making in cities. So we've been measuring how many people are in public space and what they're doing in terms of the stationary activity. But one of the questions we're interested in now, and this is in the context of this May, we opened up something called Gehl Institute, which is a not-for-profit organization which is primarily interested in social equity, economic integration, and civic engagement in public spaces. So we're not only now interested in how many people and what they're doing, but who is using a public space. And so, for instance, we've been studying age and gender in our public life observations for many years. Bryant Park Alliance, this is a massive change in Bryant Park in 1996. 39% of folks using Bryant Park were women. Now it's more than double that. What does that mean? For us, the presence of women is a good indicator for perception of safety in a place. But what other kind of data are we interested in? Well, now we're getting more interested in social mixing, economic integration. Are different people from different backgrounds actually invited to use public space? And how do we measure that? Well, and why is this important? Why is social diversity important in our cities? Well, we know our cities are divided, right, in terms of income inequality. But public spaces are where we come together. This is something that we intuitively know. This is something we don't necessarily need to measure. And diversity is core to our economic competitiveness and civility and democracy. Well, if we care about social diversity, economic diversity in public space, how do we measure it? So we at Gehl are now trying to develop some new tools for measuring social diversity in space. I'm going to talk about one of them. We combine intercept surveys, observation analysis, and something we're calling a census for city streets, where we're using an internet social media proxy to do passive data collection in public space. So we collect the 10,000 most recent photos that were posted from a space. We use geolocation information to trace back to the neighborhood where people live who took those photos. We collect some information from the survey, and this gives us a snapshot of a passive way of collecting data about who are the users in a particular place. We tried this at 2 spots in San Francisco as a prototype, Hayes Green, or Patricia Green in Hayes Valley, which is a neighborhood park, and right here in Union Square, actually, one of our central, most vital and important public spaces in San Francisco. Who's using these spaces? Where are they coming from? Well, the social media proxy turned out to give us some pretty interesting data. In Hayes Valley, 60% of the users were local, were from the Bay Area. In Union Square, by contrast, only 30% of the users there were local, with over 60% coming from other parts of the world. What does that mean in terms of the invitations in Union Square, in terms of the social environment, the spatial environment that invites different types of user groups, and what can this tell about how we inform our programming and thinking about these spaces in the future? So these aren't perfect tools. There are definitely some new things we're developing, but again, we're trying to uncover this question: what are the qualities that invite social diversity in public space and invite social interactions? I'm just going to skip over some of this. And so, how does this public life data inform design? So, Gehl works we've worked in 50 countries in 250 cities. We've been doing this public life data collection for many, many years. We now have a database, a GIS database that collects all this data from cities all over the world. We can do comparative analysis. We use that to inform strategies for design of cities. And it starts with life, again, understanding public life to inform a public realm framework for the city, and then understand how architecture and the built environment can support that life. And this has resulted in transformations, as I said, in Brighton, in Times Square, various places in the world. We've been doing this with in many cities across the planet and trying to really understand this relationship between life and form. We recently opened up offices in New York and San Francisco to be closer to cities in the US. We've got this incredible team here in San Francisco. And the question I have for you as public space managers, downtown associations are so critical now for supporting life in our cities. What kind of life do you want to invite into your downtown? Thank you.